But like I told you guys, I have a very, very special guest. Like I said, this brother here, he's done a lot. He's done a lot. He's been in the game for a while. I consider this guy a friend. We connected, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago, maybe something like that, by way of my good guy Rick Saratella. That's how I met him. And since then, we've kind of been going back and forth, corresponding, tapping in with each other, and the relationship is continuing to develop. And I love where it's going. But let me give this brother the proper introduction, right? He's a member of the Pro Football Writers Association, host of the Cover 2 podcast. He's a sports journalist and managing editor of the Eagles Wire and the Ravens Wire for USA Today Sports. Making his return. This isn't his first time here. Making his return to the Chalk It Up Sports airwaves. My man, the good brother, none other than Glenn Irby. Herb, what's going on, big dog?
Tom, chilling, good brother. Appreciate that intro, my man. Appreciate you.
Definitely, man. I had to show love, man. Like, I appreciate you for taking the time out to come on the show. Like I said, man, you have been corresponding for quite some time. Just checking in with each other. And I'm always grateful to exchange pleasantries with you, my friend. First and foremost, I gotta ask, how are you? How's the family? How's everything? How's everybody holding up?
Chilling, bro. Blessed. Just finished the workout. First break I had since this morning, with running both sites. The Eagles is back, so that's important, especially the topic we talking about, Saquon and the boys just trying to get work done. But I was happy to hop on here, man, and to make sure I got a fresh cut, everything for you.
Hey, sound good to me. So let's get right into it. So the Philadelphia Eagles training camp has just started, and there's so many storylines that we could tap into, position battles, the Jalen Hurts offseason criticism in particular when it comes to his relationship with Nick Sirianni and his leadership, the Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore effect, pressure on Nick Sirianni to get it done. Is he on a hot seat or not? Predicting the 53-man roster. There's so many angles we can approach this thing from, but let's just kind of start with an overarching opinion, right? What's your overall perspective on the Philadelphia Eagles as they're presently constructed, from personnel to the coaching staff?
I think they're one of the best teams in the NFL. I think, the great thing about retooling, the great thing about changing coaches, changing personnel, you kind of get a restart in the mind. They finished last year. They lost 6 of the final 7, including that playoff blowout. But then you switch out the defensive coordinator, you switch out the offensive coordinator, you bring in Saquon Barkley, you bring in Bryce Huff. I think they're one of the best teams in the NFC. I think they're refocused. I think the energy is different. New leadership with Kelsey and Fletcher Cox going. I think it's just about on offense, Kellen Moore getting a system in place. That allows everyone to mesh, that allows Barkley to do what he does best, while allowing Batman, skinny Batman, swole Batman to continue to do their thing. On defense, you're looking for Vic Fangio to do his thing, finally confuse opposing offenses, not necessarily give them so many vanilla looks, use some of these versatile dudes he got on his side of the ball and go from there. I think they're one of the best teams. It's just about it meshing and going from there over these next 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, it's interesting because just staying on the offensive side, right? You mentioned Saquon Barkley, and he's had an eventful offseason. I'm sure you've kept up with everything, Hard Knocks, and how that thing is kind of went viral with how his exit with the Giants went, how he ended up in Philadelphia. When you look at Saquon Barkley and everything he brings to the table, being able to be a monster in the running game, being able to be extremely effective in the passing game as well, and he's a solid pass blocking running back, something that's really hard to come across. So he's a three-headed monster in and of himself, right? What sort of impact do you anticipate Saquon Barkley having with a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, who's a dual threat product himself?
I think the offenses are different, but I think in terms of what he said yesterday, in terms of having a Christian McCaffrey impact on this team, I think that's the focus. I think you have a guy who could play all 3 downs. You have a guy who's explosive. You have a guy who now, even we talked about Devontae, we talked about AJ Brown, we talked even Dallas Goedert. You have a situation now with him in the backfield. You kind of got to play those guys one-on-one or pick your poison and allow somebody to do something. I think the biggest factor for him, and you saw it in the season finale last year, when I think he beat Nolan Smith down the sideline for a 60, 70-yard play. He's going to be super impactful in the passing game. I understand, Kenneth Gainwell, some of those guys can catch passes out the backfield. Swift was solid last year, but I think it's a situation where you can see Barkley gets 50 to 60 receptions this year as well as a pass catcher. So I think he's going to be dynamic. I think he can stay healthy. Offensive line stay healthy, do the dominant things that they do. 1,500-yard season, possible NFL Offensive Player of the Year. All those things are in play for him.
Yeah, it's interesting. Barkley, he does have a unique injury history, and he's battled that throughout his career, in particular with the Giants. Obviously, they had no offensive line. He was the offense, and he was kind of taking on more than he probably should have been taking on at that time. Nonetheless, though, how do you think the Eagles should approach his usage, right? Again, you have a weapon like that, and it's easy to get trigger happy. How do you think they should approach his usage, right? In terms of his touches, how do you think they're going to balance that, especially when you have guys like A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert on that roster? How do you anticipate the Philadelphia Eagles balancing all those different plates?
Well, I think it's like Jalen Hurts says all the time. You keep the main thing the main thing. Regardless of Saquon, regardless of one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, they're a pass-first team. They're going to pass the ball. That's what they do. They got 2 wide receivers make over 25+ million, and a quarterback make 55, so they're going to pass the ball. I think the idea is that he's someone that, again, you have to respect as a defender, as a defensive coordinator for the opposing team. He's someone that if the Eagles can get back to jumping out the big leads, having explosive first halves, he can then now play with no pressure on him, be a guy who can run the team out of the building in the second half. You keep his wear and tear down while still giving him enough touches in the passing game and the running game combined to keep him efficient and keep the offense efficient as well.
Absolutely. I want to touch on something that one of my loyal subscribers brought up, and we were talking about it earlier. Vic Fangio, he had his press conference today.
Yes.
And it was fascinating. He spoke on the personnel, guys like Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, things like that, his expectation, and he didn't really give you too many details about any guy in particular, except for Bryce Huff. And I was even reading your article on USA Today in terms of where Bryce Huff is in his overall development with the Philadelphia Eagles. For context for everybody, Bryce Huff, originally a third down pass rusher for the Jets. The Eagles are trying to transition him, especially with that new money. They're trying to transition him from being just a third down player to a first, second, and third down player, a 3-down player, right? So they asked him about where he is and what his impact could potentially be. But he kind of gave an answer that no one probably expected, right? He essentially said he's talented enough to do what we need him to do, but he's not quite exactly where we want him to be, but he will be there. So in your personal opinion, right? Because when you write, you try to keep it down the middle. But in your personal opinion, when you heard Vic Fangio say what he said about Bryce Huff, and then you heard Bryce Huff have his press conference essentially right after that and kind of dispel what he was saying, how did you process that, being a spectator?
I think the player makes a lot of money. He's confident, so he's going to come on camera and say, well, I can't stop the run. Fangio has been in the business longer than most of us have been born. So I think from that standpoint, he knows what he sees. I think that it's not necessarily a pressure where a situation where Huff has to play all 3 downs, but I think you would like to see him develop over time and become like Brandon Grant. Brandon Grant wasn't necessarily a stout pass rusher or a stout run stopper, but over time he became good at both. I think that's what you hope to have. I think you have Nolan Smith, you have other guys that can rush the passer, you have Josh Sweat, you still have Grant. So I think he'll still be situational. He'll drop back in coverage as well because he's athletic. But I think the idea that he's going to be this stout Julius Pepper type guy on the defensive end, that's not going to happen. But I think he can be stopped in the run game. He can continue to get stronger. And you don't make all that money to stop the run. You make all that money to pressure the quarterback and sack the quarterback. So I think that's what's most important. And that shouldn't get lost.
I feel you on that. If I can just challenge you just a little bit.
Of course.
The Eagles traded Haason Reddick, right? They traded arguably their most dynamic, their most productive defensive player they've had over the past couple seasons. We know what Haason Reddick brought to the table. There's no mystery about that. you essentially swapped players. You take their younger player, they got your older player. Hassan is obviously going through whatever he's going through with the Jets, with the money. But in terms of production and what Hassan brought you in terms of the motor, being able to play north of 80% of the snaps, primarily for his entire career, and definitely with the Philadelphia Eagles, being a closer, you know, in third down situations or in fourth quarter situations, right? Being a forced fumble machine. When you think about everything Hassan Reddick brought to the table in terms of production, and then you bring in Bryce Huff to kind of fill those shoes in a way, and he really has only played 40%, 42% of the snaps throughout his entire 2023 campaign, being a third down player. Are there any reservations that you may have in terms of his ability to measure up motor-wise and production-wise?
Not really, because I think that's the one thing he does have. So I think in terms of him being a closer, in terms of him getting those strip sacks, in terms of him causing those fumbles, you still want that. I think you want his snap count to go up to about 60%. You've got Zach Vaughn, you have Nolan Smith, you have Patrick Johnson, you have Oren Burks on the roster, you have other guys brought in to be pass rushers as well. So I think with Fangio, how versatile the system is, you can get that rush from anywhere. You can get that run stopping production from anywhere. I think it's a situation where late in games, obvious third down, obvious passing situations, red zone situations, you want him in there and you want him to produce. He comes out of the season, 12, 13 sacks, 70 plus pressures. We're not really discussing how he is in the run game.
I agree with that. For me, it's like, just if you can get double-digit sacks, I can sleep at night, right? And if you're serviceable in the run, I don't need you to be Myles Garrett, but I need you to be somebody that I don't have to be concerned about too often. Transitioning away from Bryce Huff and moving down the defensive line, you know, those young guys, they have a big opportunity in front of them, right? Guys like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in particular. And then I'm going to ask you about Nolan Smith in a little bit, but just focusing on the D tackle position, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and even Milton Williams, right? Milton Williams is kind of the veteran in that DT room now. When you think about those guys and losing Fletcher Cox, speak on the amount of pressure that's beginning to accumulate for those young guys. And just to add more context, Jordan Davis, he's entering year 3. Correct. And Jalen Carter entering year 2. Milton Williams, I believe, is entering year 4, the final year of his contract. So Milton Williams is looking to prove something, you know, for his money. Jalen Carter, obviously entering year 2. Money's out of conversation right now. Jordan Davis, on the other hand, entering year 3. This is an important season for him because after this season, the Eagles got to decide, are we picking up that 5th-year option? So when you think about all those variables surrounding those 3 DTs in particular, how do you assess that? What's your expectation for those guys going forward? Just give me your overall perspective when it comes to Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, and Milton Williams as it stands right now today.
Well, I think Davis is under the most pressure. He's one of the first Georgia guys to come in. He's underperformed over the first 2 years of the season, so he's under the most pressure. Milton Williams is the most consistent coming in. He's going to do what he do. You would hope that with Fletcher Cox gone, he'll get to 20, 15, 20 more snaps per game, increase his production, be stout in the run game, be able to rush off the pass. He can also slide down to the edge some as well, so you can see him do different things in Fangio's system. I think as long as Jalen Carter is in shape, Fangio said he was, I think as long as he shows that bend, he doesn't wear down, and then he starts the season off just as dominant as he did last season, he'll be okay. I think it's one of the 2 Georgia boys to carry things. So Carter has to be all pro like. He can't, he can't be solid. He has to be all pro like. You want Jordan Davis to be an elite run stuffer. You want him to be able to brush the passer as well. And you want to start to develop both of those tools. So I think Davis is under the most pressure. He's lost weight. Fangio said, he's gotten better at bending. So I think from that standpoint, the situation on defense really starts with those 3. If they do what they need to do in terms of right there in the middle, they can get that pass rush. Jalen Carter can be dominant. At that point, the defense takes another step, and Fangio can do more with the back 7, or the back 8, depending on what they play.
Do you anticipate Howie Roseman going out and adding some veteran depth to that DT position? Because again, Milton Williams is the OG in that room, and that's not really saying much. Again, I'm 29. I think Milton is 26, 25, maybe. Right. Around there. So again, he's the OG in that room, right? Do you anticipate Howie going out and bringing in a veteran presence?
Not necessarily. I mean, if they get off to a slow start, or you've had injuries or something like that, maybe. But I think in terms of, specifically Vic Fangio, he's come in, he's got them practicing more, he's got them practicing more up tempo. One of the things he spoke about today and prior to that press conference today was having the young guys play. So I think it's a situation where, you have Brandon Graham there. He can be a leader for that entire line. But I think in terms of snaps and reps, it's going to be those young guys. Now, for some reason, they don't perform, the Eagles start off slow, then who knows, how he might, jump in his bag and get in Dominican Sue or someone like that. But I think the idea is to let the young guys roll and go from there.
Okay. Moving down the D-line, Nolan Smith. He's a player that is fascinating to say the least because, last year he didn't really get the most snaps. And when he did get snaps, it kind of seemed like he had a hard time making an impact. It seemed like he got swallowed up pretty quickly when it came to those NFL level tackles.
Correct.
So the word is he's put on about 10 to 15 more pounds of muscle, if I'm not mistaken. What's your expectations? What's your expectations for him? And Nolan Smith, again, being an undersized edge rusher, speak on the uphill battle he's facing.
I mean, he's stout against the run, and I think his reputation at Georgia had him being a player that was strong against the run. So I know when we talked about in terms of some of the things that Huff can't do, you hope that he can do it. But again, number 30 pick, first round pick, the pressure is on him. You're talking about, guys like Brian Branch and other guys that went behind him. So he has his own bit of pressure. I don't necessarily think we need to see 7 or 8 sacks from Nolan Smith this season. It'd be nice, but I think with the raised snap count, better productivity, a better defensive coordinator, you would like to see him take advantage of the situations he's put in. You would like to see him definitely increase his pressure rate, and you'd like to see him be a stout run stopper.
Okay. What do you think went wrong for Josh Sweat last season? And then going into this season, where do you think he probably needs to improve? How do you anticipate his 2024 campaign going? Again, last season was rough for everybody, but he took a dip, yet his usage increased exponentially. So speak on what do you think went wrong for Josh Sweat last year, and how do you think he anticipates to turn the corner? On top of that, he did get a little bit new money from the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well, I think the crazy thing is Sean Desai, last year's defensive coordinator, he's a Vic Fangio prodigy. Jonathan Gannon, Cardinals head coach, prior defensive coordinator, he's a Vic Fangio. Gannon did a better job of using Sweat, and I think you'll see this year, if you check the depth chart, Fangio has where they have Sweat listed as an outside linebacker. So I think it'd be a situation where Fangio, that defense, they take advantage of his athleticism. I think you'll see him standing up more, still primarily rushing the passer, but I think it's about putting him in situations where you can use that elite athleticism, whether it be against a right tackle, a left tackle, and put Sweat in positions to make those plays and produce that 10, 11 plus sacks.
The linebacker position is a fascinating one as well, because you brought in Devin White, you brought in Zach Bond, you brought in Oren Burks, you obviously still have Nakobe in the building as well. But I feel like this is more so a 3-player race in terms of the linebacker standing. When you look at the linebacker room right now, do you see places where they need to improve? Or is there anybody that stood out to you? What's your overall thoughts in that room? And then I guess you can get into graver detail about Devin White. He spoke today. Devin White, Zach Bond, the competition between him and Nakobe Dean, things of that nature.
Bond is cool. He has a fan of Fangio. Vic Fangio is, he likes him. He likes his game. So I think that's something to watch. I think Devin White is a clear starter. I think from the standpoint of Dean and Bond, I think they'll battle. I think the idea is Jeremiah Trotter would probably have to be out of this world to land the spot, but I think you would like to see him earn snaps. I think you'd like to see him make a presence on special teams. But I think the overall idea is for Devin White to go back to the player he was. If you get the player he was when he went to Pro Bowls with the Bucs and was dominant with the Bucs, and at that point we can start talking about maybe re-signing him for a long-term deal, having some stability at the position. But clearly and obviously, Nakobe Dean is under the most pressure, being again another one of the first original Georgia dudes to come. 3rd-round pick. You want him to start making plays. You don't necessarily want him to be injured again. You don't necessarily want it to be a situation where Zach Bond just totally outplays him. I think the idea would be to have Devin White and Nakobe Dean as the stars. Anything other than that, then we're now looking at figuring out where the production is going to come from, and if people talking about the Eagles, the linebacker position again, and if it's a strength or a weakness.
that's the thing though about Nakobe. It's like, at least for me, because of the injuries he's battled last season, and obviously year one he didn't get any grass time. I can't even say whether the player is good or bad. And I think that's why fans are so divided when it comes to how Nakobe Dean should be used or how he's seen in the public eye.
I think him and Jordan Davis are a package deal. They go hand in hand. And I think, when you saw when Davis was dominant at Georgia, when those defensive tackles were dominant at Georgia, I understand his college, but Nakobe Dean was able to run downhill, make plays, do his thing, become an All-American. I think if the two guys, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, if those guys are dominant up front, they're doing the things they're supposed to do. If Davis is, swallowing two offensive line calls, allowing him, to do the things that he needs to do, then you have a situation where Dane can get downhill, make plays, roam side to sideline. I don't think you necessarily want him battling with centers or guards, but when he can, shoot that gap and make plays like he did early on in the preseason and some of those first games before he got hurt, then he could be a productive player.
Okay. Transition into the DBs now. Obviously you bring back CJ Gardner-Johnson. He brings a swagger. He brings a certain juice to the building. What he's going to bring goes without saying, right? But then you transition to that other safety position. And then you look at the nickel spot. And then you look at cornerback 2. Those 3 spots, in my humble opinion, are up in the air. I know the Philadelphia Eagles like Reed Blankenship. They did give him an additional year on his current deal. But we saw last year that there were some limitations in his game. Granted, he could come back being a totally different player. I don't want to strip him of that opportunity. But when you look at the DB room, I guess we can take it position by position. That safety position opposite of CJ Gardner-Johnson, how do you see that position panning out? Because the word is that the Eagles potentially may continue to vet that position and look through free agency. Again, we still have over a month left until the season starts. So, and Howie Roseman is very, very known for making a move around that time. How do you view that safety position opposite CJ Gardner-Johnson, especially with Sidney Brown being on the pup list now?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the idea eventually you would like to have that other guy be Sidney Brown, but I think from the standpoint of Gardner-Johnson returning, I think it allows you to keep Blankenship up near the line of scrimmage to do the things that he wants to do. I don't think you necessarily want him in coverage. I don't have a problem with him playing deep. I don't have any problem with him tracking deep balls. That's not necessarily a strength. But I think you want him to be up near the line of scrimmage. I think you want him to be stout in the run game. You allow CJ Gardner-Johnson to play that deep area. You allow Cooper DeJean, once he picks up the defense, to play some safety. I think Avonte Maddox can play safety. You've heard with Sidney Brown out on the PUP list. James Bradbury is playing some safety. So I think you have options there. I think if it all falls apart and Gardner-Johnson's the only player that's really playing well heading into that season opener, you could see, if he's not signed, you could see Roseman give Justin Simmons a call and maybe give him the money he wants to form a Broncos safety. But I think at this point, you'd like to see them play 2 or 3 safeties. I think Gardner-Johnson, obviously, he could be a star swagger. He brings confidence to the team. He brings attitude to the team. You want Blankenship up in the box, somewhere in that slot area, covering tight ends, nothing other than that.
You mentioned Cooper DeJean, right? He's obviously battling a little bit of a hamstring tweak. He'll be out for the next 3 weeks or so. And the new DB coach, he mentioned how we don't necessarily want to overload him just because he's versatile, right? Obviously, DeJean came in with a resume that told you that he can play anywhere on defense, safety, nickel, outside corner, whatever it may be. What do you anticipate their long-term vision is for Cooper DeJean? Is it the safety position? Is it the outside corner? Is it the nickel? What do you anticipate their long-term vision is for Cooper DeJean?
I think it's a lot of everything. I think you'll hear people say, well, he's going to be a cornerback, and that's where they envision playing opposite Quinyon Mitchell. But if you have Kelee Ringo able to play, if you have Isaiah Rodgers able to be starters, then why not play him some at safety? Play him in the slot, using like the Dolphins use Jalen Ramsey. Let him play that star position where he can be in the box sometimes. He can cover tight ends. He can cover wide receivers. He can do a bit of everything. So I think the ultimate goal would be to, you hear people use the word Swiss Army knife all offseason. Allow him to turn into that. Allow him to be a guy that can, maybe not offer the size of Kyle Hamilton, of the Ravens to still be athletic enough and stout enough in coverage to do multiple things as a defensive back.
Right. It's interesting. I was looking at the depth chart, and they had Cooper DeJean slated in that nickel spot, right? But with him losing 3 weeks of grass time, that really offsets his development, and that kind of puts Avonte Maddox in pole position for that spot. He has more experience than anybody on the roster at that nickel spot, and it kind of looks like if everything holds true, he'll likely be starting at that nickel spot throughout the season. So I guess when you look at the competition at that spot, there's some bodies there, Tyler Hall, Mario Goodrich, things like that. Do you think Avonte Maddox has a stranglehold on that role, or do you think he should still watch his cookies?
I think he should watch his cookies. Like you said, you have Tyler Hall, some of the guys that are at camp, you see some of the information coming out from camp, and you see that, Quinyon Mitchell may not win the starting outside cornerback job, but he's been solid in the slot. You want your best after watching what we watched last year and years prior, in terms of the secondary, you want your best 5 DBs out there. So if it's a situation where the outside cornerbacks is Slay on one side, Keely Ringo and Isaiah Rodgers mixing it up on the other side, and Quinyon can play in the slot, and he can take away, the CeeDee Lambs and other things like that. Why not? So I think in terms of guys having positions locked down, I think the only person that really got a position locked down is Slay, Gardner Johnson, and Blankenship. In terms of the interchangeable parts, I think they're all interchangeable. I think you'll see Fangio use them as interchangeable parts. Get his best cover guys on the field in certain situations, key situations.
I want to transition to that CB2 spot, right opposite Darius Slay. To me, it's a 2-horse race between Quinyon Mitchell and Isaiah Rodgers. As of right now, I think Isaiah Rodgers is ahead of him in the depth chart. How do you anticipate that playing out? Do you think Quinyon Mitchell is going to end up being the starter day one in week 1? Do you think they're going to bring him along slowly? How do you anticipate the Philadelphia Eagles handling that dynamic? And who do you think right now should be considered to be the day one starter?
I mean, he's the first round pick. So, when we start talking about money paying out, we start talking about expectations. The idea is that you would hope that over the next 3 weeks, he gains his footing. You see more in the preseason, and it becomes a situation where Fangio has no choice but to put him out there. But they have, like we talked about, they have depth at the position since offseason workout. Since he got reinstated, Rodgers has looked good at the position. Keely Ringo has looked good at the position. I think the only drawback on him is people saw him take lumps last season, so they're unsure. I think a starting combination of Slay and Isaiah Rodgers wouldn't be out of the question, but I think you'll see Quinyon Mitchell get his share of snaps from the beginning, like we just talked about.
Is this the most talented or the deepest DB room the Philadelphia Eagles have ever had?
I think since the Bobby, Lito Shepherd, Bobby Taylor years, those years, yeah, I think so in terms of just having stout cornerbacks. I think you had guys that got snaps last year, and outside of Josh Jobe, and that's just because he's a special teams, he's really excellent on special teams. Guys like Eli Ricks, McPherson, some of those guys, they went from possibly starting or possibly having a role to it. Now you're unsure. It's 12 defensive backs on that roster. It's 12, 10, 11 cornerbacks on the roster. At least 6 of them are pretty good. 5 of them are going to get your film to.
I want to circle back to the offensive side, right? We spoke about Saquon earlier on, and we briefly touched on, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Those guys come in with new money. Devontae making $25 a year now. A.J. being a $30+ million man, a $30+ million a year man. Right. You got to give those guys credit for doing what they do. When you think about, again, adding Saquon and you got guys like A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, right? We spoke about how they balance it, but we saw A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith do what they do last season when things kind of looked hard, right? I can't even begin to imagine the opportunities they may have with Kellen Moore, and then you throw in Saquon Barkley in the mix.
I think the idea is to be efficient. They're going to get their opportunities. They're going to get their plays like we talked about earlier. You bring Saquon in the mix, as long as he's healthy, the offensive line is doing the things that they need to do. They're going to get one-on-one coverage. They're going to get their looks. They're going to make their plays. I think, again, it's important for the run pass, the run pass ratio. That needs to be efficient. That needs to be correct. how they run the plays. We've seen, everybody's in the uproar over them using motion and zips and things like that. Option game with Saquon. How creative are they? I think as long as Kellen Moore is creative, he's not having a situation where guys are having blow-ups on the sideline, feeding dudes the ball. But, it's most important that they be efficient on offense, have an identity, and understand what they want to do as an offensive unit.
What's your take on the narrative surrounding Kellen Moore and his NFL career as a coach, right? To fill in some of the blanks, you got some people who say, well, he hasn't really proven to make quarterbacks better. Everywhere he goes, the quarterback either does a little worse or does better when he leaves. And I don't really personally buy into that. When you look at Kellen Moore and his resume, what type of effect do you anticipate him having on Jalen Hurts as Jalen Hurts enters year 5 as an NFL quarterback and year 4 as a starter?
I think you have to remember, before he got to the NFL, he was a really good quarterback himself at Boise State. He's a creative dude. If he's efficient, I think, the years he were there, the Cowboys they have a great offense, but they had one of the best offenses in the NFL while he was there. Dak Prescott had, outside of last year, he had some of his best seasons with Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore does a good job of utilizing 2 tight ends, something we didn't do at all last year. So I think it's about him being creative, being efficient. I think he gets a bad rap because teams that he coached, especially, the Chargers didn't do anything last year. And when you have a guy like Justin Herbert, and you're not able to do anything offensively despite the injuries and everything else, it makes it seem like you didn't do anything. But prior to that, like I said, the Cowboys were explosive. They put up points. They were one of the best offenses in the league. So I think that's what you want to see. I think he's learning. He's getting older. He's right there with Sirianni and those guys in terms of being one of the youngest assistant coaches in the league. So he's learning. He's filling things out himself too. I think it's about him having the weapons. He's got the most athletic quarterback he's had. He's got 2 alphas on the outside, a solid tight end, a solid running back, a great offensive line. It's just putting those guys in position to do the things that they do best. And I think Devontae Smith said that when he first got hired. Put us in position and let us do what we do.
What's been your overall take on the Jalen Hurts Nick Sirianni relationship? And I'm not going to load the question. I'm not going to preface it with anything. When you heard about this narrative about the friction or whatever they say it is, what's your take on their relationship? Do you buy it? Is it just hearsay? What's your perspective?
I don't pay that any mind. I think when you were both from Philadelphia, we understand how Philly media works. We understand how things work with the Eagles quarterback, with the coach. I think that's just a situation where that becomes a hot take and it becomes a talking point. It becomes a point where so-called experts and pundits can say what they want to say. I think they both addressed it yesterday. They both did a good job of saying, the relationship is what it is. And that's all they really need to say. I mean, Jalen gets paid what he gets paid. Nick Sirianni gets paid what he gets paid. They're professionals. They don't necessarily have to like each other, but of course they need to respect each other and they need to be on the same page. That's the most important part. Being on the same page, understanding what's going on with the offense, whose offense it is, and allowing number one to be his most efficient self.
Here's the thing though, right?
Okay.
It's fair to say that last year there was some sort of disconnect between head coach and franchise quarterback, right? I mean, obviously you brought in Brian Johnson, or you elevated Brian Johnson rather, and every time something went wrong or whatever, there was criticism to be thrown around. Nick Sirianni kept saying, "Hey, this is my offense. This is my offense." And it got to a point where I said, "Okay, all right, I'm not even looking at Brian no more. I'm looking at you." And you still couldn't be creative enough to figure out what was going on with this offense. Why were things so difficult, right? Is it fair for me to assume that there was some sort of friction at some point?
I don't know. I think the word could be disconnect. I think the proper word is disconnect. I don't necessarily know if we need to have it as friction. I think it's a situation where, like you said, that was Sirianni's offense, and only he knows how much reign or how much leeway he gave Brian Johnson to tweak things and do things. Obviously, after like we said, losing 6 of the last 7, there had to be changes. Clearly, Brian Johnson's a good coach. He landed with Washington. Got a nice position there, passing game coordinator. So, he was a great quarterback at Utah, great offensive coordinator at Florida, great quarterback coach. So he knows the game. I think it was just a situation where there was going to have to be a switch. There was going to have to be some more creativity and things like that added to the offense. And when you have a name like Kellen Moore, I feel like Howie Roseman felt like that name was bigger than Brian Johnson. Could Brian Johnson have installed his own offense and made it a bit more creative? Maybe, but after watching him as a year's offensive coordinator and watching him lose 6-7, that wasn't going to happen, and they just wiped everything clean. So I think it's disconnect. I think, last year was frustrating, lack of creativity and all that. Sirianni's taking on more of a CEO role, allowing Kellen Moore to do his thing, and I think you'll see everybody buy in, mesh better, and it'll be more efficient.
Why do you think people are trying to bring legitimacy to the Nick Sirianni hot seat rumors?
I mean, it's something to talk about. And when we start talking about in this business, clicks are everything, content is everything. As long as you got a coach like Bill Belichick, and some of these other coaches sitting out here unemployed, you can literally, until they run off 5 or 6 straight, until they get to the playoffs. You could spend 18 weeks talking about Sirianni being on the hot seat. The Eagles could go 16-2 during the regular season. If they don't win a playoff game, he's probably going to be out of here. So that gives pundits, experts, people that don't like the Eagles, people that use this material, for their own benefit, 18 weeks, including the training camp and the preseason. He's going to be on the hot seat the whole year. He'll be sitting there with Mike McCarthy and some of these other coaches that move the needle. And until they win a playoff, get to the NFC title game, something like that, he'll be on it. As long as they do what they need to do, the talking point will go away. But it's going to be here the whole season. And then they can left.
Would you say Nick Sirianni has or has not helped his case when it comes to his personality, right? I mean, we saw last year and the year before, Nick Sirianni can be very brazen. He gets excited and he loves what he does, right? He's a passionate dude. Do you think his personality type has helped him or hurt him throughout his time or his tenure as the Philadelphia Eagles head coach?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean, he comes off as this brash, cocky dude, but then he still catches hell from his introductory press conference. So you'll have some people that aren't going to like him just off the strength of that. And then, the playoff game where he was doing the nod, things like that. He's a confident dude. He's a cocky dude. Some people might say he's a front runner or whatever. You do what you need to do. But he's been to 3, straight playoffs. He's the first coach to do that. He's lined up to take his team to the playoffs again. But it's a hot point. It's a good talking point that people are going to discuss it. He's a guy that it's easy. You're either going to like him or you're probably not. We've all went to high school with those type of dudes. We've known those type of dudes. I think it is what it is.
If you guys are just joining the show, I'm here with Glenn Irby, sports journalist and managing editor of the Eagles Wire and the Ravens Wire for USA Today Sports, member of the Pro Football Writers Association, host of the Cover 2 podcast, making his return to Chalk It Up Sports. Make sure you guys continue to smash that like button. Make sure you guys stay engaged, subscribe. Make sure you guys continue to be active. I have a few more for you if you got time for me, Herb. Dallas Goedert, right? He's a fascinating player as well, because you look at him and you see how he plays the game and the personality and how ferocious he is and how much of a mismatch nightmare he is on any given Sunday. Yet it seems like the production has never really matched the talent level. Obviously, he's dealt with injury. What's been your perspective on Dallas Goedert's tenure as a Philadelphia Eagle, especially since he signed that contract?
I mean, he's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. When healthy, I think his style of play, trying to run into tackles, being strong at the point of attack, that hinders him some, but he's a willing blocker, stout run blocker. We'd like to see his average per catch and his yak go back to where it was a couple of years ago. But in terms of being one of the top 5 or 6, top 7 tight ends in the game, he's there. At this point, he just needs that 1,000-yard season. He needs a Pro Bowl. He needs to, have that actual breakout season. But in terms of him being an ultimate weapon, in terms of him being a guy that Jalen Hurts and those guys can lean on, that's there. I think it's essential for Kellen Moore to find his role. And again, it's only so many footballs to go around, so many 1,000-yard situations, but there's no reason why you can't have 3,000-yard receivers on this team.
What do you think is the most underrated or the least talked about narrative throughout this offseason for the Philadelphia Eagles and entering training camp?
I think it's the offensive line. I think it's a situation, especially if Kai can become a player, can resurrect his career. You have a situation where, again, they'll go the next 7 or 8 years as one of the best offensive lines in football. Andy Dickerson is a Pro Bowl. Mailata is one of the best left tackles in football. Lane Johnson is who he is. So I think it's a situation where as long as, Becton or Tyler Steen can be stout at right guard, I have no doubt Cam Jurgens to be stout at center. It's a situation where, again, they're dominant up front. They're going to be able to do whatever they want. So I think that's an underrated situation. That Kelsey's gone, that all around the offensive line is not there, but you still got Stoutland. You still have all pros at two positions. I think they're going to be one of the best in the NFL.
All right. Final question from me, Herb. Once again, I really do appreciate you. Howie Roseman has regularly shown that he's very serious about winning all the moves he's made throughout the off season, and even the moves he's yet to make. Right, he just seems to always be ahead of the curve. From your perspective, break down how you view Howie Roseman, and what moves do you anticipate him making next, leading up to the season?
I think he's one of the best GMs in the game. I think we harp on some of the mistakes that he made, but he's figured it out. He's accruing elite talent. I think he runs circles around a lot of these guys, but most of them when it comes to salary cap, manipulating the salary cap, being able to push money back. We're going to carry that money every year, but it's never a situation where it just handicaps us as a team. But I think it's a situation where, again, like we talked about, depending on how they play, depending on who's still out there, you could see him make a move to get a safety. You could see him make a move to add a linebacker. But I think in terms of the secondary, the pieces on offense, third wide receiver, I can see Paris Campbell winning that job. I can see one of the rookies also, but I think if he's going to make a move, it'll be to trade for or find himself, a guy that can be that third wide receiver, depending on how things go forward.
I'm sorry, Herb. I got to squeeze one more in. You touched on the wide receiver 3 spot. I don't know how that escaped me. You mentioned how you think Paris Campbell can likely win that job, but there are some people who may have something to say about that. John Ross, Aeneas Smith, Johnny Wilson, Joseph Ngata. You even mentioned maybe they outsource for another free agent. Man, just break down that talent as well in that wide receiver room that's starting to accumulate on itself.
It's something there. I would like to see Joseph Ngata get a chance. He's big body, can catch the ball. For me, I want to be able to see Kellen Moore utilize Johnny Wilson in the red zone. One tallest receiver in the NFL at this point. He may not be a starter. He may not be ready to totally contribute this year, but if you could find a role for him in the red zone, that'd be great. Aeneas Smith from Texas A&M in terms of his ability to play running back, wide receiver, return game. Feel like you got to get him involved, even if it's just a short slot role. But if Paris Campbell can put up the numbers he put up in Indianapolis when he was with Sirianni, and he could be that third wide receiver while meshing those other guys in, and you got a serious situation there too. Don't look for Will Shipley, running back from Clemson, the rookie. He can get in there and catch the ball. I wouldn't be shocked if you see Gainwell in the slot. I think it's about using all these weapons, these athletes that you got. The Eagles are always up there with the RAS scores, relative athletic scores. They have one of the most athletic teams in the NFL, especially on offense. They need to be able to utilize those guys. I don't expect rookies to come out and dominate or do things, but they got to find a role for the two rookie wide receivers indeed.
Eagles fans, there you have it, man. I'm so grateful to be able to bring on guys like Glenn Irby. I mean, he provides so much insight, so much perspective, and he's plugged in. I mean, he does a great job for the Eagles Wire and the Ravens Wire at USA Today Sports. Make sure you guys go check him out. He does amazing work. Once again, I know a lot of you guys have probably read his articles, not even realizing that he is who he is, but this is the Glenn Irby, again, managing editor, sports journalist for USA Today Sports, covering the Philadelphia Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens. Once again, member of the Pro Football Writers Association, host of the Cover 2 podcast, Philly's own. Super grateful for him for taking the time out. Herb, you know how we get down. I'm gonna likely text you after this, my friend. You be good, man. Is there anything you want to promote? Anything you want to get off your chest before you got here?
No, it's just that watch this man's show. Great, know what he's talking about. Dedicated, pop on this joint every day, man. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you pass it along. Chalk It Up Sports, Tony Shields, man.
Hey, Glenn, I appreciate you, my friend. We'll talk soon, all right?
Appreciate you, bro. Thank you.
All right. Hey, man, that was the man, the myth, the legend, Glenn Irby. I'm real grateful for him because he took the time out of his day, the middle of the day, as a matter of fact. And again, he does great work for USA Today Sports. They got him covering the Ravens now too. So you know he's doing a great job, man. You know he moving and shaking and he making them people proud. So shout out to him. And I really appreciate him for taking the time out. And I appreciate you guys for being great viewers and great listeners throughout the live chat and also just throughout the entire show. Make sure you guys continue to smash that like button and stay engaged.